The full episode is now available on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Please see the link in the description for more details.
Real quick, I also wanted to touch on this super chat that you got. This one guy, Jack Beastie, he made a very good point. I love the first sentence. When I hear a Song of Ice and Fire theories, my question is, how does this make for a good story? I agree with him because, and I'm not trying to bash on any YouTuber or theorist person on Reddit or whatever the fuck, but that's a good point. A lot of theories really rely on this person secretly being this person. And
yeah.
I think this is why you get so much praise the way you do, because Dornish Master Plan is essentially that Duran is this mastermind behind this grand idea that, you know, Qyburn is secretly working for him, Brave Companions are doing this, blah, 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 blah. It goes all over the place, and it, like, connects to, like, a bunch of different things. Same with, Pink Letter. Pink Letter, there's no one who's secretly anybody, right? It's just who really wrote this thing.
Who really wrote it? I think the original appeal of the Dornish Master Plan, and I don't know if it makes for a good story or not, but I think the appeal of the Dornish Master Plan as a theory is the fact that it takes a lot of elements that were useless in the story, like the Brave Companions, like that seemed apparently useless in the story, like the Dornish story and the Brave Companions, and gave them purpose and direction towards something that will affect the plot, you know. And I think that was the appeal. Like, oh, we have all these extra chapters of, like, Arya and Jaime and Brienne dealing with Brave Companions and all this, like, Arianne, Quentin stuff. Like, all this seems like it was a waste of time. The show isn't dealing with them. It must be a waste of time because the show didn't focus on them at all. Actually, all of that time that you invested in reading those chapters, it was leading towards something. And I think that was the appeal, that people they didn't like this wasted space of extra chapters, that they wanted these threads to be going somewhere. And so I think that's why people liked the Dornish Master Plan. I think with a lot of theories, yeah, I mean, theories might be true, theories might not be true. I mean, George writes stuff randomly, so but I do like when a theory, like, makes a good story. Like, you know, Theon Kinslayer, the Theon Kinslayer theory, which is, you know, that Theon at least suspects or fears that he accidentally killed his own kids when he killed the Miller's boys, makes for a better story. Like, that's more interesting and darker and torturous for a human being, you know? And so I think that's why people, you know, like that theory. Then there's just theories that, like, wouldn't necessarily, like, add anything. Like, say Howland Reed is the High Septon.
That's a popular one. People love to toss around on, like, online forums.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know anything about Howland Reed, so him suddenly showing up as the High Septon would just be a simple shock, which is something George does, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't enrich the story. It doesn't add anything. It's kind of an illogical, what? Okay, shocker, you know.
I guess the idea is that since Howland Reed and Ned were best friends, this is Howland's way to get back at the Lannisters for his death. I guess that's the whole thing behind it, and that he's going to make, you know, Cersei pay. He's going to humiliate her, and then he's going to, you know, have her, ultimately taken out, and so on and so forth. But at the same time,
he's not an important character. He's not an important lord. He's just like, he's nobody. He's nobody at this point in the story.
I should probably let the audience know that Preston has a vehement hatred of Howland Reed.
I do, but say I were going to take something, and I'm picking this random, right? Say, rather than it being Howland Reed, the High Septon was actually Daemon Lannister. Like, that's actually a lot more interesting. Wait, whoa. Lannister is, like, trying to destroy another Lannister? Why? What is he doing? How does that affect the Lannister succession? How does that affect the war and control of House Lannister? All of a sudden, it's, like, actually a lot richer. And I just, like, picked a random character, you know? Like, Or the High Sparrow is secretly a Dornish agent. Oh, well, that all of a sudden like changes things because Tyene and Lady Nym are coming into town, and this is happening. So, that sort of stuff. You got, it has to. You want it to pull in some interesting intrigue, rather than it just being something random. So. I don't know.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of theories about like bringing Rhaegar back to life and stuff, and it's like, well, we don't really know Rhaegar, and Rhaegar doesn't mean anything to any of the characters anymore. Like most of the characters that have cared, like with the exception of Barristan Selmy, like most of the characters that cared about Rhaegar are dead. So it's like, who cares if you brought Rhaegar back? Like no one would give a fuck. Like.
Yeah,
John Connington, I suppose, would give a fuck. I mean, I guess you can get John Connington would certainly care, but it's not quite as emotional as like him being somebody else.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like the pink letter does add a little extra spice to the story and makes it a bit more interesting than it already is. Dornish master plan, same thing. The Theon thing, same thing. I just never. I always thought it was very. I don't want to say bad, but like I always thought it was a little lazy with some theories of this character secretly being this character. It's just never really been a fan of it. How Varys is supposed to be secretly a Blackfire. How does that really change anything other than I guess
this is actually my major problem with like the. I mean, I very much do think there's a Blackfire element to the new invasion, but Blackfire doesn't mean anything emotionally to any of the characters at this point. Like it doesn't, like the Targaryens are this dying breed, right? Where Dany is the last dragon. And then discovering that like, even having Aegon there as like not the last dragon, it's interesting for only Daenerys. Like everybody else, like, doesn't fucking care. Like the Lannisters haven't been around for years. It's not this like underlying aspect of the feud between the Starks and the Lannisters. It's not this like, it's not this underlying aspect of like of Littlefinger and his like obsession with Sansa. It's it's not this underlying aspect of Doran Martell's vengeance. It's not. There's so many things it's not. It has nothing to do with Brienne's like ideas about like her oath to Catelyn. It's just a centuries old like family dispute that has like no emotional weight on any of the current characters.
But it does connect. It does connect us to Targaryen family history with Bloodraven. If Bloodraven is indeed the man in the tree.
Yes, it does. But I do think that like making the Blackfire situation a major focus of the story would be a mistake versus like a Easter egg hint behind the scene for superfans, because it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, maybe in the Red Door, Dany, remember who you are kind of sense, but like, even that is kind of like not the most salient part of Dany's story. I mean, taking something as simple as Dany is a young girl who grew up an orphan and is now like a queen who wants to break the chains of slaves. Like that's actually like a more powerful story than like Dany actually has some fuzzy memories and doesn't know who she is. As much as I obsess over like the Red Door and everything, it's kind of a lesser part of her personality, her story.
Have you heard the one about Quaithe is actually Dany from the future? You heard that one?
Yeah. I mean, this is also my problem with like Quaithe being Shira Seastar, because it's like, who the fuck cares? Like, who the fuck cares about Shira Seastar? Like Bloodraven, a guy in a tree a million miles away, but who the fuck, like, so it's like, sure, you can make her Shira Seastar, but it would have to be like this tiny little like Easter egg in the background. Even Quaithe being a Shara Dane, like, who gives a fuck about a Shara Dane? Like, like in the story, nobody, Barristan, but that's like that's it. So
he could sprinkle those in, like it being Shira Seastar, which you're right about that, or Ashara Dane. He could sprinkle that in for like super fans who read the other stuff.
Yeah.
Who read like the other material, but at the same time,
super fan Easter eggs in the background. That means like that, but other than that, like fairly meaningless. This is even the thing about. I'm even gonna go as far and talk about R plus L equals J. Like at this point in the story, who fucking cares? Like Jon was worrying about his maternity in the first book. And Ned thought about his sister and was obsessed about his sister in the first book. But you know what? And Robert was obsessed about Lyanna in the first book. But you know what? Like Robert and Ned died and Jon stopped thinking about his mom. Like he talked about her some in A Clash of Kings, but like he had other shit to deal with, like others, and trying to run the Night's Watch. And like Lyanna disappeared. So like all the characters that cared about R plus L are gone. So it to have the reveal even now at this point, it's like, well, who cares?
I wouldn't say it's pointless because it does let the audience in on this big secret. First off, I have to say, I think Comic Book Girl 19, she really popularized R plus L equals J, but because before her, like Stark, House History Stark video, it does kind of let the audience in on like this cool secret. It adds that little level of frustration and excitement knowing what we know, but the characters don't know.
Right, but for most of the story, because at this point now, because George has now like lengthened these books and has added all of these books, like we've got a whole bunch of Ironborn characters: Theon, Asha, Victarion, Euron.
Euron.
Well, sure. Do any of them care about R plus L? No. Okay. The Dornish. Maybe Doran Martell might care, but would Quentin? Would Arianne? Like, would Arya Hota? Would it have any emotional weight that R plus L? Like, they don't really care. Dany, she never even knew her brother. Like, okay. Cersei, yeah, vaguely, abstractly, she was in love with Rhaegar. But she doesn't really think about Lyanna or very much. Jaime doesn't. He actually knew Rhaegar, but
it would paint a target on Jon's back. It really would. It would make every character interact with him a bit differently than like Stannis right now. Like needs Jon's help.
Sure.
But it would make Stannis, like, if it was revealed to Stannis that Jon has Targaryen blood, he would interact with him differently. It would change a lot of things about Jon and how he could go moving forward if it was revealed. So I understand the importance of that. The Dornish could try to use him.
For like most of the book, like Sansa's story, Arya's story, Bran's story, it's kind of irrelevant. Or at least not emotionally like salient. Even something like, besides Jon Con and like Jon, who like, hasn't thought about it recently, but did think about like who his mom would be. Like those are the only characters that would possibly care. It's just not like an emotional issue for anybody else. So it's just like such an irrelevant thing. I'm just saying that like the character of Tywin Lannister is more emotionally salient for the story than Rhaegar and Lyanna at this point. Because like Tywin greatly affects Tyrion. It greatly affects Cersei. He greatly affects Jaime. He greatly affects the Dornish story. Right? Like even in a sense you could say because of the rebellion, it greatly affects the Ironborn, Stannis has a bigger emotional impact on all of these than a lot of these characters, because he has such an interaction with the Ironborn and the North now at this point. But you're just going through these chapters and it's just like, should Davos give a fuck? No. Yeah, does Melisandre give a fuck? No.
Well, like
Nobody
I said,
gives a fuck.
the only people who I think could give a fuck if it goes down that route would be the Dornish wanting to use him, maybe the Lannisters wanting to knock him out, maybe Stannis wanting to knock him out because that is a competitor.
I mean, it might add some political complexity, but it doesn't add any emotional complexity.